and welcome to The Truth Will Not Be Silenced, the show that allows Black people to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. I'm your host, Melissa Woodfork White. In today's episode, we will talk about modern day civil rights with Reverend Dr. Dante McGilvery. We'll discuss the controversial topic of modern day civil rights and voting rights that need to be shared, that allows us to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. As a Black professional woman with over 28 years in the workforce, I have personally contributed to civil rights because of the color of my skin. Sharing our stories allows us to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. There will be a special surprise at the end of the show. Be sure to listen all the way through. Our guest today is none other than Reverend Dr. Dante McGilvery. Dr. Dante is a licensed and ordained pastor, a scholar activist, the co-founder of the community-based theater company, Sleeveless Acts. Having earned both a doctorate of ministry degree with an emphasis in urban ministry and a PhD in theater with an emphasis on youth and community, he employs theater as a tool for theological education, evangelism, and social justice. A trailblazer, Dr. Dante is the first Black male to earn a PhD in theater from Arizona State University. And yes, you heard me correctly. He has 2 PhDs. He is the first theater artist in resident to teach in the Black Theology and Leadership Institute at Princeton Theological Seminary. More than anything else, he enjoys spending time with his lovely wife and their 2 beautiful children. Dr. Dante is going to share with us his work as a scholar activist, social justice activist, and modern day civil rights. Hi, Dr. Dante. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here today.
Thank you. So we're going to get right to it. What is modern day civil rights and why the need for voting rights?
Yeah, that's a good question. Many will consider modern day civil rights. They would date it back to the 1950s and so forth, to even the 60s. But and that is true. That's modern. But I think when I think about modern day civil rights, I'm thinking more contemporarily and more contemporary times. And so I look at it in the same way that Reverend Dr. William J. Barber does. And he describes it as 3, and he breaks it down into 3 reconstructions. The first reconstruction is, when Black people here were able to be freed and now be able to try to gain power and just property and all of those things. But then the second reconstruction was actually what a lot of people consider the modern day civil rights movement, the 1950s and 60s. And right now, though, we are currently in the third reconstruction, or on the brinks of it, some will say. And that's the way I like to see it, as this modern day civil rights movement is really what we're dealing with now, as an extension of what already has happened and throughout the first 2 reconstructions. And we need to talk about it and voting rights because, as I said, they are an extension of one another, these movements. And in the 1960s, we had the Voting Rights Act, 1965, and today we're still, again, talking about how voter suppression is real across the nation and how it affects people and makes it more difficult for BIPOC people or Black, Indigenous people of color and not just BIPOC people, but also the poor and also the disabled and elderly communities. All of these marginal, minoritized communities, it makes it more difficult for us to have our voice heard in this democracy.
And I'm in agreement with you. When you talk about the need for voting rights and to keep the voting rights that we do have, it comes at a cost because of the simple fact, and I like to call it post-Trump, yes, where when he lost the election,
yes,
you have many states like Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Michigan that started issuing all these redistricting of the voting in the areas and changing them to suit their needs. So my opinion, and I know that you're going to speak from the facts on this, but my opinion is that it's being done to prevent people of color, Black, brown, and the marginalized people from voting. Because when you take those voting precincts out of their areas and they have to travel 10, 15, 20 miles to get to the next one, you know for a fact that there are going to be several obstacles in the way to them reaching that other voting location versus having one in their community and in their neighborhood. Can you speak on that?
You said it perfectly, and I agree actually 100% with you. And the fact that is a fact, that is not the data agrees with that statement you made, because yes, after the January 6th insurrection and right when former President Trump issued, or he was, claimed that there was some fraud and steal the vote, all of these things. When that happened, these states, and because of the next election, when how the states were flipping, we were seeing people turn out and vote in numbers were record numbers. And with that being said, then what happened was GOP, or the grand old party, the Republican Party, decided, hey, we're going to come together, and what we are going to do is sketch out how we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Because as long as Black and brown people and poor and marginalized people come together and actually turn out at the poll, then therefore they might not have these positions of power that they've been used to or that they desire. And I say that, and because we do know, that's one reason why I use the word minoritized. It really don't, where the Black and brown is the global majority, and we do know that that even our nation is changing, so that we are becoming, it's the browning of America that we are experiencing right now. And so to prevent that, people in power from losing it forever, if you will, all of these moves are being made. So like you said, like the Senate bill that passed 1485, it removes voters from the permanently early voting ballot, a list. So that if you missed placing out of 2 elections, if you didn't use it one time, vote early, then they're striking your name. And we know here in Arizona, we're talking about 75% of Arizona voters are currently members of the permanent early voting list. And so, and out of that 75% of them, 80% of those people who use it are 80% actually use it. 80% of that 75 actually use the early voting mechanism to cast their ballots. And that's in the 2020 election. So Democrats believe that just that act alone, that one act, will remove over 120,000 voters from the list. And that includes as many as 30,000 Latinos. And like you said, it's all of this is really about the suppression action to being driven by the big steal, the lie of the big steal, And you're right, even removing some of these centers, these places where you can go and cast your ballot, and putting them further out, it's ridiculous, because democracy is supposed to be about making things easier, making our voices. Everybody has the right to vote. We all have the right to vote, of course, under minimal conditions, but I'm not talking about that, but we all do. But you're supposed to make it easier for that to happen. But what we're seeing now is that they are making it more difficult, even to the point where the state Senate has passed a Senate Bill 1713, which requires voters to return additional information with their absentee ballot. So they got to return their driver's license with it, their state ID or their tribal ID, all of these things.
All of these obstacles in place, in which you just said that democracy is all about making it easier
Bingo.
for us to exercise our right to vote. And I'm in total agreement with you, because me and my husband are both on the voting early list, but we don't always use it because we may forget due to work, and then we have to take our ballots and drop it off on the day of, or go put it in that special voting mailbox. And so we may be two of those people that they X off of the list. And so I am totally in agreement. The law should not be changed just to suit the losing party. The law should not be changed just to inconvenience minorities, Black people, brown people, and the marginalized, the poor. We're talking about people that may have to walk to the voting place to vote because they don't have a car. And so when you create these new laws that prevent them from doing what they would normally have to do to exercise their right to vote, and then moreover that, you're closing down the normal voting precinct that they would go to in their neighborhood and in their community, and telling them that they have to go somewhere else. Now, Dante, correct me if I'm wrong, they're doing the same thing down in Texas, and you are a native born and raised in Dallas, Texas.
Yes, unfortunately, that is true. That's happening in Texas also, as well as other places. But Texas, yes, Texas has a lot of things, a lot of laws going on that I totally disagree with, and that is totally going against, infringing on the rights of people. And I think that's not just when it comes to voting, but also when it comes to things like abortion, the topic of abortion, and you can't even drive someone to the abortion clinic in Texas. You can't think about that, or that's time. You're in trouble for it, and then the things you teach, when we see the banning of CRT, or critical race theory, across the nation in various states, in Texas, and here in Arizona too. They have banned books that I would normally teach as an educator, and saying that we can't teach those books no more because they're telling the truth. Yes. Go ahead. When you think about that, when I think about it, they said we don't want people to feel guilty. We don't want white children to feel guilty about something that happened in the past when they read these books and information. And I also, us? And that's what I was going to say. I'm thinking, but what about when we read?
Because that is so one-sided, Dante. When they're talking about them, white, Caucasian, you're talking about you, but what about us? You're excluding everybody that doesn't look like you. You're excluding the history of everybody that does not look like you. You're excluding the truth of everybody that does not look like you.
Exactly, and that's the hurtful thing to me, is because you do this, and like you said, when I was in school, when we read Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain, when we read all these other books aloud, nobody asked me how I felt to hear people read the N-word aloud, or hear how they referenced me and my ancestors. But in addition to that, another hurtful thing is that the fear mongering that happens around it. So you can't say anything, about race, about prejudice, about the past, slavery. All of these things will be considered critical race theory, when that's not even true. And it's not considered, that's not what critical race theory is about. But they put these things, they attach these things to it as if it's the truth, when it isn't.
Not only that, they attach it to banned.
Bingo.
Being told.
Bingo.
And it is not the truth. And so it's me coming from a 15-year veteran in education and teaching. I know that when my middle schoolers were reading To Kill a Mockingbird, we're talking about predominantly Black and brown students reading it. They would say to me, do we have to say that word? They didn't even want to use that word, Dante, because they don't refer to them as that, themselves as that, and they don't see themselves as that. And so even coming from them, you talked about how difficult it was for white children reading those books and not wanting to say those words, but you're talking about Black and brown children. We're talking about Black and brown children reading it who doesn't even want to say the word either, because they understand the context in which those words were being used. And it's very hurtful, it's very painful, and it's somewhat traumatizing.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Well, moving into the next question. What does modern day civil rights look like as a scholar, activist, and as social justice?
Yeah. Um, this movement looks like I'm kind of hinted towards it a moment ago, since it is an extension of what we've been dealing with all these throughout the years. And really, I think of it the way Brian Stevenson says it. Brian Stevenson is a lawyer, but he's also he's the founder of EJI, which is Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, the founder of and creator of the Lynching Museum down there. But one of the things he said was that slavery hasn't ended; it only evolved. And when I
I'm
think
gonna have
about
to interrupt you on that one because I heard that 10 years ago.
10 years ago,
Yes, that it has. Oh, we know black don't crack, Dante, but there's an age gap between me and you.
yeah, I got you. I
So
got you.
I graduated with my first degree in 1999.
Okay, okay,
And so
okay.
I heard that 10 years ago, and it made me stop and think, and was like, it was so true 10 years ago that slavery has not stopped, it has evolved.
Yes,
But go ahead.
that's right. So it's he might have been repeating something that it already was in the air that we know, you know. And with that being said, I think about the new uh, what we're dealing with now, the new modern civil rights movement, if you will. It's not really anything new, but as a scholar activist, it looks like what it has always looked like. Unfortunately, and that's the sad reality, and it's an indictment on us as a nation. Um, you know, as the old saying say, the more things change, the more they
Yeah,
stay the same.
yeah.
And it's that yes, there's a lot of things change. Yes, we can sit at the front of a bus now. Yes, we can own a company now. Yes, we can ascend to presidency, or we can sit on the courts now. You know, but the thing is, it doesn't mean that the issues and injustices that we faced in the 50s and prior no longer are real today, because they are. And
Yes.
they are real, and they are intentional, they are strategic about how to how injustices are put forth today. So even when, like a moment ago, so when we talk about what does the civil rights movement of today look like?
Yes.
It's the same, but it's also an extension. So we extended it. It's extended to the LGBTQIA plus
Mhm.
community. It's extended to womanist and what it means, the woman's perspective, intersectionality, and of Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined that term, and all of these other things, and womanism, as Dr. Katie Cannon
Yes.
has founded and then picked up
Dropping
by
them
Emily
gems. I know
Townsend.
all about that.
Yeah, so it's all of these things. It's about the least of these.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's really about. It's extended so much so that so as a scholar activist, what I do, what it looks like to me is studying all of these various parts and knowing that you can't study it all. There will always be new things happening. But
Mm-hmm.
when I approach these civil rights or justice period, I learned in my doctorate in the PhD at ASU program. I studied in the Justice Studies department, and I learned at that moment that there are people who come to injustices, and to talk about it from a justice lens, but we all come from different lenses as it relates as justice is concerned.
Yes.
So that some come fully political, some come through feminism, some come through whatever. But my primary approach is as a minister, and so I'm in the same wave as the civil rights leaders, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King,
Mm-hmm.
and so many others of the 60s and 70s. But even more than that, I think that I also learned from the mistakes of that
Mm-hmm.
era, so that they were able to kind of overlook a Ella Baker, or kind of, but she was wise at how she positioned herself
Yes.
and forward the movement. So to me, as a scholar activist, I'm using history, what was actually done, and learning from it in order to see how to apply those tools and techniques in our time today. And I do that through theater. I do it through ministry work that I'm doing as a pastor of justice and outreach and justice. I do it as a scholar in my scholarship, the things I write about. But not just that, scholarship speaks to a certain audience. Theater speaks to a certain audience. But what I do is I bring all of these communities together because that's who I am. I bring all of me together in order to present these in communities where who are normally not, this information or these things are not usually discussed, seen, or spoken about. And so I'm always looking for my marginalized spaces to position myself in, to facilitate or work with the community, co-create with the community, these types of things to help engage the mind in activism and activate them to movement.
Well, I would like to share for our audience that I have had the privilege of seeing you perform. I've also had the privilege of seeing you speak, and I've also had the privilege of reading your writings, your works. And
Yes.
So with that being said, I mean, the work that you're doing, as a scholar activist, and also, for social justice, is ongoing. We're talking about from you being from Texas, then you going to Colorado, and then now you being in Arizona. Your work has extended over 3 states, and you've continued that fight for justice. And you've continued to fight against those injustices. So now I want to ask you, how has modern day civil rights and the fight for our voting rights affected you? And I'm going to ask you because the first thing that people see when they see you, they see a Black man.
Yes.
They don't know that you a double PhD. They don't know that you a reverend pastor. The first thing that they see, Dr. Dante, is that you are a Black man. So I want you to share with our audience, how has this evolved civil rights into modern day, into the area into which we are, and the fight that we have to fight to keep our voting rights has affected you as a Black man?
Yes, thank you for that question. And it has affected me and impacted me to a great extent, a great deal, because in fact, finishing the PhD in theater, one of the things I did was wrote the entire dissertation in the form of a letter to my 2 children. And it was, while it was talking to a broader audience in general, I situated my letter format in the same tradition as James Baldwin, or as he wrote to his nephew, and as he said, as I look in your face, I see the faces of your mother and your grandmother and your ancestors. And I was doing the same thing to my 2 children. And that's because what I wanted them to know is what I would want them to know beyond reading a dissertation, is that inequities exist in every field that you can imagine, and it's in the fabric. And I know people don't like to hear that or want to believe it, but it does. Inequities really does exist in the fabric of American society. And so therefore, when you go into education, it affects me. That's why, I was the first Black male to graduate with a PhD in theater from Arizona State University. You would think that would have happened years ago already. That's why. So it's impacted me a great deal, even with voting rights, because what it does is empowers me to let me know. I root everything I do. I rooted in the Word of God as a Christian first, and then as a minister, the Bible says that the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. And so I often think, like, when I'm going into things, when I see things, God has shown me, this is where I am. This is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to say. So that when I was in Dallas, and God showed me there's the poor living in Dallas, and I wanted to see, well, what does it mean to live life homeless? and how does that affect the way I think, the way I view life? Because if Jesus came to earth and he decided that he would be poor, he said the birds have nests, the foxes have holes, the Son of Man have no place to lay my head. How did that change or give Jesus a perspective that most others might not have? And so for 1 year in Dallas, I did a homeless project, from November 2011 to November 2012. And I was chronically homeless, living in a shelter, living on the streets, and then gathering data and seeing life that way, but also moving to Denver, Colorado. The first 3 months, I was homeless there and living in the homeless shelter, Samaritan's house there, and living on the street as well. And then finally moving here and continuing the justice work. All of these things combined shows me that the harvest, that there's always work to do. And it shows me that, one thing I share with everyone is that through that homeless experience alone, it showed me that there are people who have less than those who have nothing. And I was, standing in a homeless shelter, you get there at a certain time, you can have a room. If you don't get there at that time, you can have a cot in a big, like a gym type of area. If you don't get there, but if you're too late for that because it fills up so fast, you can go in the overflow room where you have to sit in a chair. If you miss too late for that because it fills up so fast, you're on the street. And most of the time I was on the street. And that's when this Lord showed me that there are people who have less than those who have nothing, that even among the poor community. So that means that we have multiple communities bigger than what our minds can imagine. There's micro communities, because one person will say, oh, that's the homeless community. But within that homeless community, there are certain levels. There's a bed, there's a room, there's a bed, there's a cot, there's a gym where you sit. But if you don't, there's the streets. And on the streets is where I found the least of these among the least of these. And so it showed me that that God is always calling us to do work, to speak on behalf of the least of these, and any of those communities there are. And that's why I care so much about voting rights and other issues of today, because we are taking away the microphone from the voices from the people in these communities so that they can't be heard or seen. And someone said it well, Dara Cooper, who was a food justice activist, she said that it's not that people stop saying you give voice to the voiceless, because it's not that people are voiceless or communities are voiceless. They just don't have the microphone.
Wow. Oh,
we're always speaking. Yes.
Let me tell you something. That one hit me because I've heard it, and I'm gonna be honest. I've said it too. But
me too.
When it was brought that way, my mind was just blown, because that is so true. They may not be voiceless, they just don't have the microphone to say it loud enough.
Yes.
I'll tell you something else too, Dr. Dante, is that you also shed light on the different levels of homelessness. I did not know that. But because you did that study and you experienced that, you shared that with all of us today. And I did not know that there was different levels to homelessness.
Melissa,
Wow.
when I tell you, I wouldn't have known that either, until I experienced it and I studied and I saw it and I lived it. And I also saw one of the greatest myths that there are about homelessness is, they're so volatile, they're so, crazy. Those are some terms.
That's what they show us on the news, Dante.
That's what they show us. And it's a reason why they show us that, because most of these cities, Dallas, Denver, and even here, they are image-driven cities, and they don't want your homeless people laying in the main streets of downtown, or they don't want that image to be. They don't want the city to have that reputation. So homeless shelters are usually, even if it's downtown, it's on the outskirts somewhere where there's dilapidation or something like that. And so, but I didn't know that until I experienced it. But one of the myths I saw is that people say that they're violent and all this, but they're actually the most vulnerable communities there are. So that the violence, even when it comes to physical or verbal, it wasn't from the homeless community when I was there. It was from police officers. It was from people passing by. Those were the most vulnerable people can't be the people who have nothing. It's the people who have something and project thoughts on you as to who you are. stereotypes and biases of who you are and what your existence mean because of what you don't have. And
I
so,
will tell you something, Dr. Dante, and I'm so glad that you shared that, is that, and just for our audience, he's not saying that homeless people cannot be violent. He's just saying that they're not all violent, and majority of them are not violent, because he did live among the homeless people. And for me, I'm a former youth pastor. And so when we used to do our different outreaches and so forth, we went to the homeless shelters, we went to the women's shelters, we went to the children and women's shelters, and I didn't experience any of that either. I experienced people that genuinely needed help. I also experienced that everybody's story is different as to how they ended up homeless, because one of the things that they tend to project on the news is that everyone is homeless because they don't want to work. And that is not the truth. Bingo. Some of them have mental problems. Some of them have physical, they've been physically, some type of abuse that led to them having to leave that situation, would result in them being homeless. And then, you do have some that just couldn't cope it in today's world with all of the stereotypes, all of the disparities, they just couldn't take it. So they'll rather be homeless. I mean, everybody's story is different, but the news only projects what the news wants people to know.
Yes. That's right. And I do want to also thank you for saying that about, I'm not saying that there are no homeless people that won't do something violent, because we know that's true. But also, I want to inform people that when we're talking about homelessness, it's not much different than talking about these voting rights issues or modern civil rights issues of our day, because what we're talking about is how people in power continuously and intentionally and strategically do what they can to not give the mic to people less vulnerable, marginalized people. Communities don't have the mic, not just because they incidentally live here or there. No, it's strategic to not place a microphone in these communities. That's, again, going back to CRT, critical race theory. Don't give the mic to people who are going to talk about history, even if it's true. Yes, don't give the mic to people who are going to tell you about their ancestors. There's a scholar, Linda Tawai Smith. She's an indigenous scholar. She said that institutions never remember, communities never forget. And I think that's powerful, because the institution and those in power, they want to forget about the injustices that they and others have done in the past to communities.
And their
Bingo. And their ancestors. Yes, that's true.
Upon us.
Bingo.
Upon brown people.
Bingo.
Inflicted upon indigenous people.
Bingo. But communities never forget.
Yes, and you are so right about that. And that's my whole platform here, to be seen, to be heard, and to be human. It's to get those stories out that people don't want to give the mic to us or to other people, where we can tell the truth and tell those stories, and so that people really are informed and know about what's really going on. They know all of the facts. Even with the Voting Rights Act, I'm going to be honest with you, as they presented in the news, Dr. Dante, they put it in such a confusing manner, and they're not straightforward about it, to say that, well, these voting laws were fine prior to the election, and now they're not okay post the election. And then they can't give you reasons as to why they're not okay post the election, other than the fact that it clearly demonstrates that they are doing it to favor those that are in power. Once again, going back to that powerful mic that you gave us.
Yes. Communities they're not voiceless, they just don't have the mic. And that means these communities are always speaking. But if you can't hear them,
being seen, and they're not always being heard, and they're not being treated as human.
That is right. That is absolutely right. Yes, you're absolutely right.
With that being said, everybody has to do their part. Like you said, like the word of God says, we need more workers.
Hey,
We need more
yes,
workers. The
we
harvest
need
is
more
plenty, but
workers.
we need more workers. We
Yeah,
need more people out there doing the work. And the thing about it is, you can do the work, however, within the gifts and the skills in which you have. You don't have to have a big platform. You can create your own platform to
that is
get
right.
to have your own mic.
You're absolutely right.
And so with that being said, I also want to share with our audience that with your company, Sleeveless Acts,
Yes,
you know, you offer classes.
I do. Yes, we do.
And we're not getting off of the topic by talking about Sleeveless Acts, because that deals with the work that you are doing as a
Absolutely.
scholar activist. Can you share some of those classes with us right quick?
Yes, so Sleeveless Acts is a community-based theater company that Claire Redfield and I started in 2018, and it's a 501c3 nonprofit. And what we do is we do theater with marginalized communities, and that's of all sorts. That's elderly, and we've done work with them. That's with youth. We've done work with them. That's Black and Brown communities. We've done work with them. We've put on productions called Celebration East Lake Park, an annual production that highlights the importance of East Lake Park, the history there, and the people and heritage of that community. And to do this, we've interviewed 2 years of research. We talked to people in the community, and we use their words, their voice to create stories to present. And so we're always in communication with, in collaboration with East Lake Park. And then we even teach at universities. We teach techniques of how to do theater for marginalized or some people call oppressed communities, which I kind of no longer like to use the word oppressed. Because that's what people use as fear mongering. That's one of the reasons they criticize critical race theory, is to think that Black and Brown people, it teaches we will always be oppressed, white will always be oppressors, when that's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. But nevertheless, we teach those techniques and tools, skills to at universities as well. So you can always go to our website, sleevelessacts.com, www.sleevelessacts.com. This is why we named ourselves Sleeveless. Is the saying that let's roll up our sleeves and get to work. Well, we're saying we're always embedded in these communities, so there's no need to have sleeves. We don't have anything to roll up. We're already here, and we're always at work in these marginalized and communities like your podcast that are unseen, unheard, and overlooked. And that's who we are about. And we've done that on many occasions, and that's our focus for our theater company.
Awesome. I mean, I personally have seen the work you've done. I know that you also did some Black history work, yes, and that you had some courses with some youth, and they, yes, did some projects. I mean, you are doing a phenomenal job. And it doesn't matter wherever the Lord sends you, He knows why you are there. You are equipped to do it. And it is just awesome. So for our audience, if you would like to get in touch with Dr. Dante, if you would like for him to come speak or teach a course, or if you would like to join in on any of the work that he is doing to bring about this much needed change and to end the disparities that are taking place, that should not be taking place, with people of color, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and marginalized, please contact him. Please reach out to him. Dante, Dr. Dante, do you have an email where people can email you and get into contact with you?
I do, yes. So there's a few ways. You can either follow me on social media and reach out to me there. I'm always responding to people who DM me. That's Dante, Donta, McGilvery, McGilvery. You can find me on Facebook under that name, and on IG, Instagram, it's under Dr. Dontá McGilvery. And then you can find me there, or you can connect with some of the work I'm doing. I'm a pastor of outreach and justice at First Institutional Baptist Church, which is downtown Phoenix under Dr. Warren H. Stewart Sr. And as a justice outreach pastor, I'm getting ready right now. We're getting ready to roll out some of the voter registration ways to get people active and get people informed about what's happening. Some of the things we talked about here on this podcast episode, we're going to be spreading those words. So if you want to be a part of that team with me or learn more about it, you can reach out to me at dmcgilve@fibcaz.org. Again, that's D as in Dante, MC, G as in go, I-L as in Larry, V as in Victor, E as in Eric at fibcaz.org. And you could reach out to me that way and I will get you connected.
And I would like to say that whether you are in the Arizona area or not, he also does all across the state. So don't be hesitant. So if you're in another state, please contact him. Please reach out to him, because his work, as you have listened and watched throughout this show, it goes beyond where he currently lives. And so it transitions. And so with that being said, thank you so much, Dr. Dante, for joining us today. I've learned a lot. And I hope our audience has too. Thank you for being here and being on my show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Melissa, for this wonderful conversation. I mean, I'm totally fueled up now. And so thank you so much for bringing this topic to the light.
You're very welcome. Next week, we'll continue to discuss controversial topics about race and have conversations about personal and professional experiences with racism, love loss, employment, and education. Stories that need to be shared, seen, and heard that makes us human. The truth will not be silenced. To be seen, to be heard, to be human. The surprise. Following the link in the show notes lets Buzzsprout know that we sent you and help support our show. Buzzsprout is the best way to launch a professional podcast. Want to ask a question, be a guest, or subscribe to the podcast? To this podcast, The Truth Will Not Be Silenced, click on the show link. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.